Have you ever stopped to think about what actually happens when an entire government administration is put on trial for trying to overthrow its own constitution? It's wild. The sheer scale of what went down in South Korea between 2024 and 2026 is honestly almost hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about the historic June 2026 sentencings of a nation's absolute highest officials: the president, the prime minister, the defense minister, the justice minister, and the interior minister, all of them facing an unprecedented judicial reckoning for executing an illegal self-coup. So today, in this explainer, we're going to break down the anatomy of this crisis. We'll look at how the courts systematically dismantled the coup's bureaucratic apparatus and figure out what it all means for the future of democratic resilience worldwide.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the historic reckoning. Then, manufacturing a crisis. Third, the 6-hour coup. Fourth, the hierarchy of guilt. Fifth, the judicial controversy. And finally, number 6, a divided democracy.
Section 1. The Historic Reckoning. Sentences that shocked the world. Okay, so we're going to start right in the thick of it. June 2026. The South Korean judicial system delivered a history-making verdict, firmly establishing that executive authority provides absolutely zero immunity against charges of insurrection and treason. None whatsoever.
Section 2. Manufacturing a crisis, the pretext for martial law.
Now, to really understand this rapid timeline, we have to step back a bit to late 2024. The government at the time was completely paralyzed by this venomous gridlock between the conservative executive branch and the liberal-controlled legislature. It created a profound siege mentality that laid the psychological groundwork for everything that followed. Look at October 2024. Incredibly, and the courts revealed this later, the administration actually orchestrated covert drone flights, dropping propaganda right over North Korea. The goal? To explicitly provoke an armed retaliation and fabricate a national state of emergency. That manufactured external threat became the exact pretext they needed for imposing domestic martial law in December. And right after that declaration, we see this insane rapid cascade. Martial law is nullified just hours later, President Yoon is formally removed from office by April 2025, and it all culminates in these historic life and multi-decade sentences in early to mid-2026.
Section 3. The 6-hour coup. The night of December 3.
All of those manufactured tensions, they completely boiled over into a truly frantic night. At exactly 10:27 p.m. on December 3rd, President Yoon shocked the entire world by declaring emergency martial law on live television. Almost immediately, heavily armed military troops, helicopters, and police units violently blockaded the National Assembly. They were literally trying to physically prevent elected lawmakers from carrying out their duties, all while the administration was prepping for the mass arrest of key political opponents. But the coup rapidly unraveled, and honestly, it all comes down to one incredible number: 90-0. Defiant lawmakers from all sorts of political factions showed immense physical courage. They were scaling fences, breaking through military barricades, just to achieve a unanimous quorum so they could legally overturn the decree. This massive crisis, which absolutely threatened a return to dictatorial rule, was over in just 6 hours.
Section 4. The Hierarchy of Guilt, Deconstructing the Insurrection.
So, with the coup thwarted, the massive legal fallout began. Let's act as forensic investigators for a second. The defense teams for the administration kept arguing that declaring martial law, even if it was legally flawed, was really just an administrative mechanism of the presidency. So we have to ask the critical question the courts faced. What exactly is the legal threshold that separates a flawed, bad administrative emergency order from outright treason and insurrection?
Well, simply put, the answer lies in Articles 87 and 91 of the South Korean Criminal Act. The courts fully acknowledge that, yeah, presidents obviously need emergency powers for genuine crises. However, that legal line is firmly crossed when an order comes with a specific intent to subvert the Constitution. By using fully equipped combat troops to physically block elected lawmakers and paralyze a co-equal branch of government, the executive branch crossed a massive line. Their actions perfectly met the exact legal definition of initiating a riot to overthrow constitutional organs by force.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the judiciary parsed out varying degrees of culpability,
We see President Yoon hit with life plus 37 years, and the defense minister with a massive 63-year sentence. They were recognized as the physical architects and primary enforcers of the treason. But look at the prime minister at 15 years compared to the interior minister at 9 years. They both participated, sure, but the court strictly penalized high-level institutional subversion way more heavily than downstream administrative compliance. Prime Minister Han actively tried to create a false legal shield for the coup and actually destroyed backdated documents. The courts view that corruption of the legal framework as a much higher order of democratic betrayal than the interior minister's unfulfilled orders to local police to shut off utility access to media organizations. And if we drill down into the actual blueprint of the bureaucracy, we can see exactly how the state apparatus was co-opted. Former Justice Minister Park Sung-jae didn't just passively go along with it, he actively weaponized his entire ministry. During those frantic 6 hours, he issued 3 specific directives. First, detention preparation, literally auditing correctional facilities to secure space for mass political arrests. Second, prosecutorial support, prepping state prosecutors to provide a veneer of legitimacy for military tribunals. And third, immigration control, preemptively slapping travel bans on political targets to keep them grounded. The court ruled these weren't just standard administrative duties, they were essential, operational conditions required to actually pull off the coup.
Section 5. The Judicial Controversy. Presiding Judge Lee Jin-gon.
You really can't understand these trials without understanding the highly polarizing figure sitting right at the center of them. Judge Lee's courtroom demeanor was aggressively unorthodox. He openly and quite harshly reprimanded former cabinet ministers right on the stand. He'd demand to know things like, as a former prime minister, what measures did you take for the people? Even more unusually, Judge Lee consistently handed down sentences that far exceeded the already severe recommendations made by the special counsel. For example, when prosecutors asked for 15 years for the prime minister, Judge Lee independently escalated it to 23 years in the very first trial. Now, while pro-democracy advocates absolutely lauded this strict accountability, conservative legal scholars and defense attorneys forcefully pushed back. They accused him of conducting trials with a presumed guilt, arguing that his direct, aggressive interventions actually compromised the procedural neutrality of the court.
Section 6. A divided democracy, the polarized fallout. So, the courts deliver these decisive, legally binding verdicts. But did it heal the nation? Honestly, far from it. Let's impartially break down this hyper-polarized aftermath. On one side, the newly ruling DPK claims the absolute moral high ground. They position themselves as the institutional defenders of democracy, successfully leveraging the crisis to sweep into power and solidify their control over the state apparatus. On the flip side, the conservative PPP base has forcefully pushed back. PPP representatives point straight at the new president, Lee Jae-myung, accusing him of using his new executive authority to indefinitely halt his own pre-existing criminal trials. The conservative bloc is calling this a silent insurrection. They're accusing the DPK of using shielding laws and huge legislative majorities to paralyze the balance of power and set up their own form of legislative dictatorship. So while the legal question of martial law is officially settled, the political narrative warfare is literally as fierce as ever.
This intense tension was definitely reflected from an international perspective, too. Global watchdogs were monitoring these trials extremely closely. When prosecutors initially sought the death penalty for President Yoon, organizations like Amnesty International expressed immediate alarm. Their stance was clear. Seeking the death penalty is a step backward. The international community fundamentally praised the ultimate accountability of the life sentence. They viewed it as rock-solid proof that independent courts and citizen resistance can actually counter authoritarianism, but they firmly cautioned that the response still absolutely has to adhere to modern human rights norms.
So, geopolitical scholars everywhere are looking at South Korea right now as a real-time global blueprint. What actually stops the self-coup? While the ultimate bulwark is a robust legal architecture combined with active citizen resilience. South Korea's 72-hour impeachment rule and that constitutional mechanism allowing for an immediate parliamentary nullification vote worked exactly as designed. The crisis wasn't resolved through civil war, it was resolved through the measured procedures of the Constitutional Court and civilian criminal trials.
But it does leave us with a deeply complex, fragile legacy. We've seen the anatomy of a coup today, from manufactured pretexts to 6 frantic hours, right down to the heavy gavel of the judiciary. Accountability was achieved, for sure, but the partisan grievance is still very much alive. Which brings us to a final question to leave you pondering. In an era of extreme hyperpolarization, can a democracy ever truly heal after putting its own leaders behind bars? Or does the battle for the soul of a nation's democracy simply shift to a new, equally bitter venue? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.